Hello and welcome, I'm Tarek Bazley and this is Downstream, the week's top stories in the world of science and technology on Al Jazeera. This week,
and lift off.
What goes up? We take a look at SpaceX's attempt to safely land and recycle its launch rockets. Zapping a moving tumour, we meet the researchers using beams of high-energy particles to treat cancer. And keeping it cool in Senegal, the vaccine chillers that are saving the lives of children. But first, this week we saw the start of the trial against the alleged Silk Road founder Ross Ulbricht. He's charged with running the black market website known for offering illicit goods and services like drugs, guns, forged documents or even hitmen for hire. KRISTEN SALOOMEY is following the case from New York.
We know that Ross is the friend who always shows up.
The friend you call when your car breaks down, or when you need help moving, or when you just need help.
That's Ross Ulbricht, as described by family and friends. But to the U.S. government, he is the dread pirate Roberts, mastermind of a sophisticated online criminal marketplace known as the Silk Road. Wired reporter Andy Greenberg was the first to interview the dread pirate Roberts by email before Ulbricht's arrest.
He thought of himself as more than just a cyber criminal. He had this kind of libertarian anarchist philosophy, and he saw the Silk Road not just as a money-making scheme, but as the beginning of this. He called it a new epoch in the history of mankind.
The Silk Road allowed buyers and sellers to deal in illegal wares, primarily drugs. The digital currency known as Bitcoin and software known as Tor were used to protect the anonymity of users. Ulbricht's arrest has raised suspicions that the U.S. government used illegal surveillance methods to track him. The trial could set a precedent for how online crimes are prosecuted.
If this trial is successful, and if the government has shown that they can link an individual to operating a website on the Tor network, then it's obviously going to have implications for criminals and criminal gangs.
Ulbricht's supporters say the case has implications not just for criminals, but also political activists and journalists who use Tor. Not to mention anyone who cares about the Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution, which prohibits unreasonable search and seizure.
I feel like the Bill of Rights is on trial as much as Ross is, and it's very concerning. But actually that concern kind of fuels my energy because, and I am fighting for my son, of course, but it is bigger than Ross.
Such lofty issues are not expected to be a big part of his defense, however, as he faces conspiracy charges for drug dealing, computer hacking, and money laundering.
During the trial's opening arguments, government prosecutors reasserted their claim that Ross Ulbricht is the dread pirate Roberts. Ulbricht's lawyers conceded that he did build the Silk Road, but argued that he had handed over control of the site. They said he was lured back in once the government investigation was underway to take the fall for a criminal conspiracy he had little involvement with.
We'll be following the case as it unfolds in the coming months. But has the arrest of Ross Ulbricht had any effect, and how easy is it to access the dark web? We'll take a look at that in a minute. SpaceX founder ELON Musk gave it a 50-50 chance of success, but the attempt to land the company's launch rocket safely back on a floating platform was ultimately and once again unsuccessful. SpaceX is trying to pioneer a reusable system it says could dramatically cut the cost of getting materials and people into space. Here's Tom Ackerman.
And lift off of the SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket with Dragon, continuing the resupply chain to the International Space Station.
This is the private company's 6th unmanned cargo mission to the space station following a 4-day delay. But though the launch was successful, there was disappointment with a key test objective. The company was aiming to execute a maneuver that would salvage the discarded first stage for later use. Thruster engines and fins were supposed to bring it in for a precision soft landing on a solid target floating far out in the Atlantic. A spaceport drone ship platform measuring just 91 by 52 meters. But SpaceX CEO Elon Musk reported in a tweet, "Rocket made it to drone spaceport ship but landed hard. Close but no cigar this time. Bodes well for the future though." That future would see a dramatic advance in space travel, reusable rockets, as Musk explained in a seminar last year.
If we have rockets that are reusable, we could reduce the, fully reusable and can get to a decent flight rate. The potential is there to get a 2 order of magnitude reduction in the cost of space transport.
Musk said the platform was undamaged, though some support equipment on deck will need to be replaced. Before the launch, he had cautioned that odds of success in a first-try soft landing were no better than 50-50. The 1.8-ton cargo aboard the Dragon, including food, scientific experiments, and spare parts, is on course to reach the space station on Monday. Next month, it's scheduled to return to Earth and splash down in the Pacific.
Well, that's the new face of the American space program, an increasing number of private companies on board developing new technology. What, though, of the Russian space industry? In a moment, we'll take a look at the state of science and research there. Also, for the first time in 30 years, a new set of antibiotics. But are they enough to stop the growing number of cases of drug resistance? Now, though, some of the other technology stories of the week. There's been a huge increase in the number of times Google has been asked to take down search results. In 2014, the search engine was asked to remove 345 million search results that linked to copyright infringing content. This was twice the number of requests compared to 2013. The system's designed to make it harder to find sites where you can illegally download films or music. If you're watching this in the US and you want to get away from the cold weather, well, you could think about a trip to Mars. According to NASA, parts of the red planet are significantly warmer than parts of the United States right now, even though Mars is 50 million kilometers further away from the sun. It's a relatively balmy -8 degrees Celsius in parts of Mars, warmer than Chicago, Detroit, in fact, much of the Northeast. And scientists at the University of Alberta in Canada say they've created the perfect poker player. They've come up with a computer program they say never makes mistakes and can't be beaten. It developed its abilities after playing a mere 24 trillion hands of poker every second for 2 months. If you fancy trying your hand, you can play against the poker bot on the university's website. Well, the Russians were the first to put a man in space, Yuri Gagarin's 108-minute flight in 1961. But the country's reputation for scientific excellence has taken a knock in recent decades. Efforts are underway to restore its former glory, but as RORY CHALLANDS discovered, the country faces many challenges.
The opening roof lets an early winter chill into the observatory. Boris is used to this, of course. He's young, a potential future star, but the astronomer is already well aware of the challenges faced by Russian scientists. Challenges that go beyond having to wrap up warm.
We have to reduce this gap between us and developed countries. This requires a lot of resources. The budget allocated for science decreasing with years, so I think the main policy is that science is not very important.
This observatory here was built in the 1950s, which was a golden period for Soviet science lasting through until at least the 1970s. But the collapse of the Soviet Union dealt a crippling blow to research here. All that money and prestige that had been lavished on scientists just disappeared. It drove many of the scientists who'd made Soviet science world-beating to leave for the West. But how are the ones who stayed, and their protégés, doing now? Well, a Spanish firm that monitors academic journals puts only Russia's dominant Academy of Sciences in the world's top 100 scientific institutions, and last year ranked the country 15th for scientific research. The problems, say some, are not just about money, they're cultural and structural too.
It's really, I would say, kind of chaos. That state starts some programs, but it's very unclear actually what they want at the very end. So money invested, but then it disappears and we come back, so they're not approaching, in my opinion, some good goal.
Vladimir Putin shook up research funding with a decree saying institutes should compete for it and stop assuming they'd just be handed cash. Another policy sea change for Russia's scientists to cope with when they just want to reach for the stars. Well,
returning now to the Silk Road trial underway in New York and a look at the bigger picture. Has the arrest of Ross Ulbricht had any real effect? And just how difficult is it now to access the deep or dark part of the internet? It's hidden from normal internet browsers, but the so-called dark web turns out to be simple enough to access, as easy as downloading and installing a free web browser called Tor. It connects you to the internet anonymously, and then with the help of a few site lists, you can access a wide variety of goods and services, among them a host of illegal offerings, drugs, weapons, stolen credit cards and counterfeit money. It's still remarkably easy to access the dark web, and the offerings, despite the ongoing crackdown, are still diverse. The trouble is, in a completely anonymous environment like this, you don't know who you're dealing with. They could be genuine sellers of illicit goods, just scammers, or law enforcement agencies seeing who they can catch. Last November, an international police operation took down at least 27 darknet sites, resulting in 17 arrests. Europol said it demonstrated that the activities of criminals online were no longer invisible nor untouchable.
Law enforcement tries to reduce the confidence in these markets by arresting folks like the alleged operator of Silk Road, any of the iterations of it, or by taking down a particular tool that has a big market share. But essentially these markets just bounce back. There's high confidence and low risk.
The FBI says Silk Road turned over $1.2 billion in just over 2.5 years. Numerous new sites have appeared since it was taken down, many of them now believed to be run outside the US.
And these days the successor markets are presumably run out of Eastern Europe. But you still need local dealers to sell. So I think that law enforcement will just continue to focus on the major dealers and the financial infrastructure using their existing tools.
The dark web has also featured whistleblowing websites like WikiLeaks and other similar sites. But publicity around the arrests and shutdowns appear to have increased public interest, in particular in the online illegal marketplaces.
People who are not in the markets, who were previously unaware that they existed, are now aware of the low risk, high gain of getting into these markets.
One report this week suggests a new version of Silk Road is now running on a network called I2P, an even deeper, darker part of the network. It's reported to be a lot harder to access, a new challenge law enforcement agencies are, no doubt, already tackling. A technique which uses precise beams of high-energy particles to destroy cancer cells has been around for more than 20 years. It's proved to be highly effective and selective in the way it kills certain tumour cells, but only in parts of the body like the head that can be held perfectly still. Well, now researchers are developing tracking technology which will allow them to target moving tumours like those found in the lungs. I visited the research lab in Darmstadt, Germany.
These are the slices of a real tumor in a patient.
Gerhard Kraft has spent his life developing a technique known as ion beam cancer therapy. Using beams of carbon protons, the core part of the atom, he's explored how they can be energized, then used to precisely target tumor cells while sparing the surrounding tissue. The technique proved so effective that 90% of patients with deep-seated brain tumors fully recover.
The main interaction with a tissue or with a material around in general is at the end. So you can go somewhere in and do something at the end. It's like a knife which is at the end very sharp, and in between you don't see it at all.
Particle beams work exceptionally well when they're treating tumours in parts of the body like the brain, which can be held absolutely still. But many tumours appear in the body in areas like the lungs or the liver, and they're continuously moving inside a patient. That's why scientists here are developing a new technique which actually tracks the movement of the tumour during therapy. They've used a robot to emulate the movement of a lung tumour inside a patient's chest. The particle beam tracks the movement of the cancer and continues to deliver a precise and targeted dose of radiation where it's needed.
Going to the real patient, everything becomes more difficult. Because like in the setup here, for example, you could really see from the outside, you could just follow the robot movement and you could see what is happening. Of course, in a patient, the tumor is on the inside, so you can't really see what is going on.
Using motion tracking technology, the researchers are developing ways to match the movement of internal organs like the lungs with points on the outside of the body, while continuously checking that the beam is on target. The researchers say the technique, once it's perfected, will cost less than a third the price of chemotherapy, have little or no side effects, and be much more effective.
If this technology would be more common in the rich countries, it will be cheaper, and then it can spread over also to the less rich countries.
The machine costs around $120 million, but it has the capacity to treat 10,000 people over 5 years and could be used for treating other conditions, in some cases even replace traditional surgery. The team say the technique demonstrates how advances in particle physics and computer technology can play a part in the ongoing fight against cancer. But when it comes to technology, it's not always the most complex that turns out to be the most effective. And here's an example, a simple chiller box that keeps vaccines cool and is proving a lifesaver, as NICOLAS HAQUE discovered in a remote village in Senegal.
Visits from Nurse Ibrahim and his team are a special occasion. There are no hospitals in this remote region. Their arrival always attracts a crowd, especially when they're spotted carrying vaccine coolers. No one here has ever been vaccinated.
It's great. All the kids of the village are getting it. The government has made vaccinations free of charge for all children under 5.
But getting it to those who need it the most is difficult. Vaccines need to be kept between 0 and 8 degrees Celsius. In this environment, they typically last only a few days, damaged because of lack of proper storage.
There's no electricity here to power a fridge. Sometimes we have ice, but we can't control the temperature. No one really paid attention to this problem before. Giving us vaccines is not enough. It's crucial we find a way to conserve and transport the immunizations, otherwise our work is useless.
Many children continue to suffer from infectious diseases like tuberculosis, polio, or yellow fever.
Too many children die of preventable diseases. Take a look at these numbers. 1.5 million children died last year because they weren't vaccinated. The United Nations say that's unacceptable.
UNICEF is distributing newly designed vaccine coolers to district nurses in regions where children die the most. On the outside, they look like regular coolers, but take a closer look. These are manufactured specifically to withstand the tough sub-Saharan climate. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is investing millions of dollars in companies developing new vaccine coolers. This one is powered by a rechargeable battery and conserves the vaccines for up to a month. It has a microchip that can be accessed remotely to monitor temperature. Researchers are also working on a solar-powered version. But some district health workers argue that these latest designs are impractical. Coolers need to be light and sturdy enough to withstand the shocks of transport. Back in the village, Ibrahim and his team are on the road again. These vaccines need to be used before they are damaged. Ahead is a 10-kilometer walk to the next village, where more children are waiting for their first life-saving injection.
Scientists in the US have discovered the first set of new antibiotics in nearly 30 years. The breakthrough is being hailed as a game changer. Antibiotic discovery peaked during the 1950s and 60s. No new consumer antibiotics have been discovered since 1987, and since then many diseases have become resistant to antibiotics, making these drugs ineffective. Well, Professor Kim Lewis is the lead scientist of the study, and he says the new antibiotics show a lot of promise when it comes to microbial resistance.
As a scientist, I must say that I am even more intrigued by the property of this compound, which we found, that it is substantially free of resistance. That has been a great problem with currently available antibiotics. Our pathogens develop resistance to them, and then they become less effective or completely useless. Well, this particular compound is probably 2 years away from clinical studies, and then it'll take another 3 years for the clinical tests. So we're probably 5 years away from the mark.
That's all I have for you this week. If you've enjoyed it, please do share this video and have a look at our website, Al Jazeera English at aljazeera.com. You can also follow me, Tarek Bazley, on Twitter at Tarek Bazley. We've also got a growing number of episodes of the show on YouTube. There whenever you want them. Thanks for watching. Until next time, goodbye.